Later, we have the influence of Tan Xuanzang, and his important contributions are quite astonishing. He was a young man who was troubled by some of the inconsistencies in the teachings, Buddhist teachings, and he, as I had mentioned in some of our previous talks, and masters also mentioned him considerably in some of his talks, Xuanzang traveled from the Xi'an area, Chengdu area, west, and then through the desert of what we would know as Afghanistan, and then across the passes in the mountains into what would be now Pakistan, Kashmir area, and then finally into northern India, where he found himself at Nalanda, the great Buddhist university. And without going into too much detail, and there's wonderful books on the subject, Xuanzang eventually was able to study with a great monk who was 106 years old, and was able to have a greater understanding in penetrating the sutra treasury with wisdom. And he was able to bring this teaching back to China. And when he arrived back in China, this again is in the middle portion of the 7th century, he was somewhat concerned because he had left China without permission of the emperor, but the emperor was so pleased that he had come back with these texts from Nalanda and was in the process of translating them, that the emperor not only welcomed him back but also provided him with a new space, new buildings, and other students who he could train to help him with his translations. So this was of great benefit to our world today, because we have some of these wonderful translations as a result of Xuanzang's group. So there were two wonderful monastics who studied with Xuanzang. And the one that we're most interested in today is Huiji. Another was a Korean monk who eventually went back to Korea, and and Caddy actually has a good pronunciation of the Korean monk's name who studied with Xuanzang. His name was
Yuan Ce.
Thank you. So that's the Chinese name, right? I think probably, right? Yes, very good. So he also had a Korean name, I think, Wan Chok, something of that name. I'll have to find the Korean pronunciation. So the two of them were just wonderfully gifted translators. And around the time that Huiji was around 25, they began to translate the work called the Chengwei Shulan, which is the doctrine of mere consciousness. This is a very important text that goes through the 10 different commentaries on Vasubandhu's 30 verses. Now, I have to explain a little bit here, because I don't want to go too far afield into the philosophical without grounding this in our practice. The mind's tendency to grasp onto things is very quick, very fast. It is difficult to master being able to prevent the mind from grasping. The reason that this happens is because the grasping mind is so fast. it runs faster than our wisdom and understanding. So by the time our awareness catches up to our grasping, the mind has already grabbed onto it, wants it, and doesn't want to let it go. And even more than that, it's created choices. Now they create a new world for the mind in which to live that reinforces what it is that we've grasped onto. Take, for example, a person who has trouble with gambling. The person sees an advertisement on television that tells how wonderful it is to go to the casino. Without much awareness, an hour later, the person finds themselves at the gambling casino, hardly being aware that they traveled to get there, because the mind is so absorbed in gambling. So the mind has made a choice to go and grasp onto the gambling, and so even though the person loses their money, they're still stuck in the gambling experience, and they can't get out. Now they've created a new world for themselves, which is called the world of the gambling mind. It's very difficult to get themselves out of that because the mind has already made those choices. I indicated before that there is a certain type of grasping which is like the mind of the monkey that reaches into the hole that's in the coconut, grasps the food in the coconut, and then the monkey can't get the hand out. This is a Pali called Icha. This is the mind that gets stuck. So this tendency is a result of our grasping being so habitual that it's faster than our awareness. So we practice being in the moment. Learning to be in the moment means being able to bring our awareness into a pace where the mind can now pay attention to how quickly we grasp onto things. So how long is a moment? So according to modern science, a moment is about 5 to 8 seconds long. 5 to 8 seconds long means the length of a breath. So when we practice meditation and we focus on our breath, we're training our consciousness to be able to pace ourselves to a breath, to the length of our consciousness moving at about that pace. We can slow our awareness down so that we can see more clearly what's happening. Just like in the Large Hadron Collider, they speed things up in the collider and they bring the subatomic particles together, but then they have to slow it down so they can take a photograph of it. And so they have an awareness of it. So that means that they have to bring things into no interference, just to be able to see things very clearly. So in the same way, when we sit and we practice our meditation, we keep the mind very still. Also, when we do walking meditation, we're walking at a slow pace. It's about a step. Full step takes about 5 seconds. We're slowing down our awareness so that we can pay attention and be just in that moment. When we can get into that moment, we have a better opportunity to see how the mind wants to grasp on. Let's go back to Kuei-ji. So Guiji, not only did he do translations of the Cheng Wei Shalun, which is about this process of how the mind grasps onto things and why the mind grasps onto things and the mechanism of how that happens. This is called Yogacara. But he also wrote commentaries on this. And unfortunately in English, there are very few translations and access points into Guiji's commentary. I was only able to find one reference by a Clarence Hamilton who translated this text in 1933. Not available anywhere that I could find. There is a commentary on the Heart Sutra by Guiji that was translated by Dan Lusthouse from Harvard, and that is available. You can find that. So we can get a little bit of a sense of how Guiji was able to make sense out of things. So actually, Guiji wrote 2 commentaries on the Cheng Wei Shalun. There is a dissertation thesis that was written by Alan Sponberg in 1979 on Guiji's philosophy of Vijñāti Matrātha. This is, means the mere consciousness. So this is somewhat available in pieces that I was able to find. I'm going to quote from his text about mere consciousness. This is a little bit of Guiji's view. The view that nothing is cognized independently from the transformations occurring within our own consciousness. In other words, everything we become aware of is nothing but the transformations of consciousness. So again, not going too far afield into the philosophical, but bringing it into our own practice. We know that there are the 5 skandhas, the aggregates. And as we practice, our mind is able to get in tune with how moments go from one to the next. This is what consciousness is. So through the mechanism of our own consciousness, we can examine and see that our body is impermanent, always changing. We can see that our feelings are impermanent, always changing. We can see that our perceptions and cognitions are changing, always impermanent. We can even see that our habit energy is like that too, always changing, impermanent. When the mind becomes sensitive like this, it wants to also look at itself, at its own consciousness. But the ego is very powerful and very strong. When it begins to look at itself, it wants to say, there must be some part of this consciousness that is permanent, unchanging. So as the Yogacara school developed, they began to break down what consciousness itself was into different components. How our senses take things in. We have the eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose, tongue, body consciousness. Also mind consciousness. So the mind consciousness, also we break it down in the Yogacara school, and then there is this part of the mind that wants to hold itself as being most important. This is called the manas, part of the mind that makes everything about itself. And then another part called the alaya, the place in the mind that has the storehouse energy of all of the seeds of our past from beginningless time. This was attached to and said, that must be permanent. So after Xuanzang's translation, there was a controversy that took place between what was called the Northern School and the Southern School. Dawan, this is a period. And then the Northern School said, consciousness, this very subtle part of consciousness, this is real. And in that real part is our Bodhi nature, our Buddha nature exists right there, inherent. The Southern School, however, said no, even that is subject to transformations. It's not inherently existent. So the Southern School is the school to which we see that Guiji was a part of. As a result of these changes that were taking place in the Northern and Southern School, there was another school that came out of this. If those people who may or may not be aware that there are the 13 schools of Chinese philosophy, so I'm going into a little bit of history. And one of these schools was called the Flower Ornament School, and the other one was called the Dharma Characteristic School. Faxian. Close? So this Faxian school is the school that is attributed to Guiji. So, how does this come about, and how does it break down? And how is it connected to our actual practice? So a little bit of the philosophy. So in the original Changwei Shalan of the 10 commentaries, there was a controversy that arose between Guiji and Xuanzang. Xuanzang wanted to write 10 different books, each one stating the point of view regarding consciousness and how it exists. Guiji said, I don't think that this is a good idea. What we need to do is to write one book and put the 10 different commentaries in a list and end up with the one that seems to make the most sense. Xuanzang said, no, I don't think so. We should do it the other way. It allows us to have much more room where you can put in much more material and explain things in greater detail. Guiji said, if you decide to do it that way, I'm going to resign. All right. So Xuanzang said, okay, we'll do it your way. So they created the Changwei Shalan according to Guiji's design of having the 10 commentaries in a row and ending with the definitive wisdom of Dharmapala, who was the 10th commentator. Now, one of the great contributions of Dharmapala, of course, this is all based on the work of Vasubandhu of the 4th century, so we're kind of moving along here between the 4th and the 7th century. So Dharmapala in the 6th century said that there were 4 aspects of cognitive experience. So these four aspects have to do with the objective aspect, namely what's out there, phenomenon. There is a subjective aspect, which is how it is that we view what's going on outside. Then there is a confirmation of what it is that we see. There's our consciousness that says, okay, that's what it is that I'm seeing, that makes sense or that doesn't make sense. And then, this is the contribution of Dharmapala, there is an acknowledgement of that confirmation. There's a re-witnessing. So we see it again, and because we see it again, we know, okay, that's what it is that we're perceiving. So those are the four aspects. So this self-witnessing aspect and the witness of the self-witness, that's what we are really calling, in a sense, the other aspects of our subjective experience. That's where we get the illusion of having a soul, of having an independently existing self, because of this subjective witnessing and re-witnessing. That's what gives us this illusion that our self is real. This is what Dhammapada says. In addition to that, it also gives rise to the idea that what it is that we're perceiving is also real and unchanging and inherently existing. When we look at this table, we don't see the table as, oh, it's changing. It looks like it's pretty real to us, and it looks like it's going to be here for a very long time. Certainly in respect to our own consciousness and how long our consciousness lives, the table may be here for what we might call a long time. But in the big picture of the planet, for example, it's unlikely that this table is going to exist for another several billion years. It will be changing. So Dhammapada emphasized that even though we look at things from our consciousness point of view and it looks like it's going to be real and inherently existing, in fact, it's also something that is always changing and impermanent, doesn't have inherent existence. So it's empty of this inherent existence. It only exists within the framework of causes and conditions, cause and effect. It's not outside that, as is our entire consciousness. Even as Shoranjung interprets that even our alaya, jnana, is like that as well. Our root consciousness. Now, of course, these consciousnesses, as we become aware of them, and our mind slows down enough so that we can take a Large Hadron Collider snapshot of our consciousness moving through this space, we begin to have an understanding of how our awareness works, and our consciousness actually becomes transformed. So instead of being caught up in the idea that what we see and what we hear, etc., is really how it is, we become aware that everyone sees things a little bit differently from their own point of view. They have their own awareness. It's all connected to the fact that we have similar sense organs. But of course, our sensory awareness is different than that of the insects and the animals. So when we look at the world from this point of view, we have a certain openness to other people's experience. Our opinions become more peaceful, less in opposition. So this is called the cognition with unrestricted activity. That means that there is no restriction in our cognition to being able to accept the viewpoints that we see. We don't attach to them. And then our discriminating mind that wants to go through and make separation between things, it knows to do that, but it doesn't do it from the point of view of craving or grasping, and then it experiences what's called the wondrous observing cognition, which is a very good description of what happens with the transformation of the mind as it begins to enter into the states that we would call the beginning of the bodhisattva experience, where joyfulness arises. Not necessarily a ha-ha kind of joyfulness, but a joyfulness in the heart. And then the selfish mind becomes the mind that creates the self, transforms also into the cognition of equality in nature. A sense of equanimity takes place, where preferences fall away. And the storehouse consciousness, the aleya, becomes transformed into what's called the great mirror cognition, where we become aware that what our consciousness is doing is just reflecting our process of becoming enlightened. So, Guiji's essay on the Vijnati Matrata, your consciousness, talks about 5 persistent afflictions that the mind has. How the mind is blocked from being able to have these transformations in our consciousness. So, the first one is called the attachment to false views. The primary false view is that the self is inherently permanent and that objects are inherently permanent. This is the viewpoint that the untrained mind is very attached to. When we go out into the world, we see that most people are attached to the idea that they exist separately and that objects, if they can possess them, are going to give them some great pleasure that's going to stop them from suffering. And when this doesn't happen, it causes a lot of distress for the mind, a lot of disappointment. I thought that this object that I would be able to possess would make me happy. This is the untrained mind, the untrained worldly mind, uninstructed worldly mind. It just gets disappointed. Oh, I just went out and I bought a new car. Oh, I'm so happy. I'm going to take my car to the mall and buy myself a new outfit. That will even make me happier. So I go to the mall, I buy an outfit, I come back to my car in the parking lot, scratch. Now unhappy. So this false view that my happiness is going to happen makes a person disappointed, and then irritability is the result. The person becomes consistently irritable because they've been told that getting stuff is going to make them happy. So, according to Guiji, this is persistent in the mind until a person arrives at the first bodhisattva bhumi, the first stage of being a bodhisattva, these false views are still part of the mind. The second of the 5 persistent afflictions is this craving for objects of desire. So this again fits with the false view of the permanence of self and objects. The craving for the object of desire is very strong. Then it goes even deeper into craving some form, any kind of form that would make the person feel secure, safe, which leads to the craving for existence. I don't want to leave this world. So these 3 cravings are not severed until the person reaches the 3rd and 4th bodhisattva bhumi, the ground stage. And then finally, this ignorance being the last of the 5 afflictions. The ideas that we have that are so troublesome to us about what we're doing here. What is our purpose? Why is it that objects don't give us satisfaction? The deeper understanding of that, not severed until the 6th and 7th bhumi. So these are the contributions of Guiji, which leads to the Dharma characteristic school, Fasya. Physics teaches us that inside of this object is something smaller and smaller until we get to something that's jumping in and out of existence. This is actually the teaching from one of the later chapters in a text called the Avatamsaka Sutta, which is the fundamental teaching of the flower ornament school. The flower ornament school, the flower ornament sutra of Avatamsaka says, inside of every point in the universe, there is a vibrating jewel that's vibrating in multiple dimensions. Quantum physics, currently the predominant view to explain gravity, is that called string theory. String theory says in every point in space there is a vibrating string, vibrating in multiple dimensions. When the mind becomes very calm and is able to penetrate into the nature of things, we see impermanence so clearly that it changes how it is that we relate to our experience. So suffering is transformed in the mind. It's not that suffering stops, but we see it in a completely different way. Our loving kindness and compassion is so great that we see the connection between suffering and our practice. So these are some of the great contributions of Guiji. And in a certain sense, one of the problems is that he became so philosophical that maybe the ideas became so esoteric that that it was difficult to translate that into daily practice. So many of the ideas and great profundities of this school became then absorbed into another school. This other school that absorbed these ideas and put them into practice is called the Chan school, Zen school, where we practice here today. So I want to thank you for your kind attention. May all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings never be separated from the altruistic joy, which is free from suffering, and may all beings dwell in the great equanimity, which is free from attachment, aversion,